Recording in progress.
Welcome to The Odds Are Good. You need to know about problem gambling, a presentation brought to you by Nicasa Behavioral Health Services and Fox River Valley Libraries. To introduce myself, I'm Elizabeth Thiel and I'm with Nicasa Behavioral Health Services. We're a behavioral health organization in Lake County since 1966. I am a resident of West Dundee, which is how I came to be connected to this wonderful library system. I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a problem and compulsive gambling counselor. I've spoken on responsible gambling and problem gambling throughout the state as well as nationwide in different conferences. I am on the board of directors of the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, and I also teach process addictions at the College of Lake County. We are able to do presentations like this through all of the wonderful support that we have from the Illinois Department of Human Services, Substance Use Prevention and Recovery, Lake County Community Development, United Way of Lake County, and wonderful donors and volunteers. Nicasa and myself, we are neutral on the subject of gambling. So this presentation is not to tell anybody that gambling is bad. We are not neutral on the subject of problem gambling. So our goal is to make sure that communities are aware of the possibility of problem gambling, the risks involved, and how to come together to raise awareness, to prevent problem gambling, and to support those who are struggling with problem gambling or gambling disorder, which we'll learn more about today. The format of this presentation is pre-recorded, so we won't be able to do any interacting, but as all of us get back to more in-person stuff in the future, hopefully we'll have some live in-person presentations and workshops where we can do a lot of live Q&A and have a more lively discussion. So to get started, I really want to stress that people are people. We don't fit neatly into different boxes or categories. At the same time, categories do help us to understand what's happening to us, know what to expect, and to try things that are known to work. And so when I'm talking about gambling disorder and some other related conditions, I will be explaining what we know about these conditions right now. And I say right now because our understanding of things does change over time. And I want to acknowledge that everyone's experience is unique and valid. So if anybody who's watching this has had a different experience, that experience is valid, and everybody is unique and different. And we will also look at what might help people based on what we know. Before we get started, it's really important that we're all working with the same definition. What is gambling? If I asked a room full of people, I would get a bunch of different answers. And so we're going to have a standard definition that we use to make sure that we're all understanding it the same. The definition is going to be risking money on an event for which the outcome is unknown in the hopes of winning more money. And you can see on my written definition here, I have or something of value next to the word money, because sometimes people gamble stuff. When we're talking about teens often gamble stuff rather than money as well. So if you come home and the Xbox is gone, or there's a new Xbox or device, it could be something that you might ask yourself, where did that come from? Is that something that is related to gambling behavior? The key components of this definition is there is an element of risk. It's not a sure thing. It involves some sort of currency or something that's valuable to the person, and the outcome is unknown. The goal is to win more. And this will help us. The lines are actually getting very blurred between video gaming and gambling, and there are a number of gambling aspects to many video games. That's probably a topic for a whole other discussion, which I'm happy to facilitate at some point. But this definition and these components will help us to be on the same page for this. So if you asked yourself, is the stock market gambling? And because this isn't live, we're not going to have our answers popping up on the screen here. But I do tend to get most people answering yes, and some people answering no. And if we look at our definition, am I risking money? Yes. on something that I don't know the outcome of? Yes. Do I hope to get more money? Yes. So the stock market is technically, by our definition, gambling. Now, why, given that, would some people answer no? It's often because those people are incorporating additional aspects to the definition. For example, I'm not doing it for fun. I'm doing it because that's what people do with their retirement accounts. They are either passively or very actively in investing in the stock market. And so our definition still holds true. There is no requirement that it be for fun. It is just factual that you have something that you're risking. You don't know if you're going to get more or not, but the hope is that you do get more. So what gambling is not? Gambling is not necessarily playing cards or games for no stakes. I have a stepson who is very, very knowledgeable about problem gambling and what gambling is and what gambling isn't. And we'll play bingo sometimes. And even we have the little roller where the balls come out. But he says, but we're not playing for money. And he knows that that would turn a game that we can play as a family into a gambling game. But I do have the word necessarily in there for a reason, because other people can have a more stringent definition of gambling, and that's okay. So if I'm somebody who's recovering from gambling disorder and I have chosen to eliminate all forms of gambling from my life, if I am very cautious to bring anything into my life that could be experienced by my brain as gambling, my definition will likely include anything that is gambling like, anything where I could win. And so in that case, playing bingo or playing cards for chips would constitute gambling for me, and I have the right to use that definition. And gambling is not necessarily bad. As I said at the beginning, that's not my goal here to tell people that gambling is bad, but to help people to understand the risks that are involved. And many people, if not most people who gamble recreationally as adults through state-sanctioned gambling opportunities, are able to do so without significant adverse consequences. And we will talk later on about what that would look like for somebody who's choosing to bring gambling into their life in a recreational way. And then gambling is not the same thing as problem gambling. And so I will try hard to make sure that I am not mixing those two words, because they're very, very different things. And before we move on to what is problem gambling, we should make sure we understand what things are gambling. So for anybody who's watching this, if you could just try to imagine what kinds of games constitute gambling. And were we to do a live workshop, when we do a live workshop, we'll actually all be able to submit our answers on questions like this and have our answers show up on the screen. But gambling is all around us, and it includes things like casino gambling, and these are the things that people typically think of, like poker, roulette, blackjack, slots. Lottery is gambling. Bingo, a lot of people wouldn't consider bingo gambling, but if you're buying your cards and hoping to win, that is constituting gambling. And then video gaming terminals, which you might have seen in some of the local establishments around you. Even online gambling, and then sports betting. So these are just some examples of gambling that's around us all right now. And if you had to take a guess at how many places you could legally place a bet in Illinois, I've got some options up here on the screen for you. And typically we have people estimating between 43,000 and 80,000. And I like to say that's a trick question, because people are both correct in both of those answers, because prior to the most recent expansion bill, which went into effect, I want to say January of 2020, there were about 43,000 places to legally place a bet in Illinois, and this paved the way for additional locations and upwards of 80,000 individual spots. And that would include, if you have an establishment, for example, with video gaming terminals, and there's 3 of them in there, that would be 3 versus 1 as far as the establishment. And so lots of places around us to gamble. We can gamble on lottery. There's a nearby casino. There's off-track betting. There's the horse track, bingo parlors. We can gamble on our computers. And if we thought about what's the closest place to gamble, and you had to think about where would that be? Is it down the road from me? Again, the trick question and answer is it's on our phones. You know, all of us have, most of us have access to a smartphone. Anything with internet access, we could technically be gambling from the convenience of our own phones. And so just to give you an idea of local figures, what's the scope of gambling? In West Dundee, and this is as of the time that the most recent reports are available for video gaming terminals, there's about 8 establishments in West Dundee with 34 terminals. And from January 2021 through the end of May, about $422,000 was lost by players. Now that is revenue. So when I say lost, it's revenue that was generated for the establishment, for the municipality, for the state. We have to remember where that comes from. It comes from the money that players put in, but didn't take back out with them. And so what does that equate to for a municipality? Approximately $21,000 in tax revenue. And that's for a little less than a half of a year. We know that there's a nearby casino, and just to give you an idea of some of the gambling that can happen through the casino, I'm going to look at sports wagering only, just because the reports are easily accessed from the Illinois Gaming Board website. About $23 million was wagered through the end of April through the Elgin Casino's sports book, most of that being online versus in person. That's not saying that's what was lost. That's just what was wagered on sports wagering. And all of this just to tell you, not to say, again, good, bad, or otherwise, that a lot of gambling is happening around us in our communities. And with that can come, for some people, problem gambling. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. What is problem gambling? It's also known as gambling disorder. So I'll say problem gambling a lot. Other people can say gambling addiction, compulsive gambling. There's lots of terms. The most current terminology is gambling disorder or disordered gambling. And it is known to affect anywhere between 1% and 2% of the general population. There was a 2016 estimate that Illinoisans had a rate of about 2.2%, but the 2% number here is based on a 1999 study that estimated that amount. Though that was in 1999, what gambling looks like now is definitely different. A lot of people believe that that number will be higher. It's hard to know. And thankfully, the state of Illinois has funded a large-scale impact study so that we can get a current estimate based on actual Illinois data, not extrapolated from what was, looked at elsewhere, to see what is the impact of current gambling options on Illinoisans. And so that's exciting. It's a great development. It's a good use of gambling revenue to look at the impact of gambling on communities. And so a lot of people in the field who care about problem gambling are excited to see what do those numbers end up being, and then how do we use the information to help people better. Now, problem gambling or gambling disorder is the only non-substance addictive disorder recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. So right next to alcohol use disorder and cocaine use disorder is now recognized gambling disorder. And it is known to be a behavior that can lead to significant impairment or distress in individuals. So what does it look like? What we're going to list here are what we call symptoms. And the more that somebody has of these, the more severe the disorder is known to be. So the first one is needing to increase bets. And so if I'm a poker player and I play $5 or $10 a hand and I just stick at that, that's not, this symptom. But if I find, okay, that's just not enough for me, I don't feel excited anymore, I need to be betting $25 a hand or $40 a hand, that would constitute a need to increase my bets to get the same level of excitement. If I'm a slot player and I'm, playing the nickel slots and I need to play the quarter slots, then I need to play the dollar slots and I need to max bet every time. I need to triple my bet every time in order to get that same level of excitement. That would constitute a more disordered way of gambling than a non-disordered way. Someone who's gambling in a disordered way is also possibly going to become restless or irritable when quitting. They might also become depressed, sad when quitting or cutting back on gambling. They can have unsuccessful attempts to either control, cut back, or quit gambling. They can be very preoccupied with gambling. So what does this look like? This looks like fantasizing very much about playing, spending a lot of time and mental energy preparing to gamble, figuring out how to get money to gamble, what to tell people to account for my time when I'm gambling, fantasizing about future wins or past play. And this should not be confused with something like we've all seen in the news where there's a giant jackpot in the lottery and a lot of people are spending time at the office cooler like, if I won the jackpot, I would pay off my mortgage and move to Cozumel, whatever. People having these fantasies about what they would do. That is not this. This is a preoccupation that is very difficult to take their mind away from. So it's a lot of time and mental energy fantasizing about reliving past wins, like just not being able to kind of let go of that past gambling behavior. And then some people who gamble in a disordered way will actually gamble to escape physical or emotional pain. So they may have health problems, they may have actual chronic pain, and they find that when they sit down at a video slots machine, they don't feel it for a while. It kind of numbs it. Or you can have somebody who has a high degree of anxiety or is dealing with trauma, and they find that when they are scratching lottery tickets or when they're sitting at a poker table, that they don't think about that for that whole time that they're in that gambling episode. And so people can find themselves gambling for longer than they would have wanted to, given that it is serving as a temporary escape from what they are experiencing. And what it can also look like is chasing losses. So here's a clear one where we could distinguish between somebody who's gambling in a non-disordered way and somebody who's gambling in a disordered way. So if I am a non-disordered gambler and I go and let's see, I am playing roulette and I lose $100. I go, ugh, that was not fun. Why does anybody even do this? And I don't play again for a while. Maybe I don't ever play again, or maybe I don't play again for a whole other year until the next time somebody invites me out for a great buffet and, a night at the casino or the night at the bingo parlor. A disordered gambler is going to have a much harder time stepping away when losing. There's going to be a sense of a desperate need to win it back. And so instead of going, that wasn't fun, not doing that again for a while, they will say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I lost that. I need to keep playing because I have got to win that back. And so they might go back to the ATM and get a bunch more money and put that in the machine, or buy more bingo cards or buy a bunch more scratch lottery tickets because they've already spent too much, and then they spend more trying to win it back. Unfortunately, what that can lead to is more losses and then more desperate need to try to win that back. So they might come back later that day, they might come back the next day, they might come back at their very next paycheck in order to try to win it back. And it can become a bit of a not good cycle where they're chasing losses, having more losses as a result, chasing bigger losses, and having a very hard time interrupting that cycle. They may often hide the extent of their gambling. So they might say they're doing one thing, but they're actually gambling. Unfortunately, and I'm going to keep pulling this up because it's relevant to our lives right now, with the advent of a lot of online gambling opportunities, it's easier to hide that you can be gambling. And unfortunately, we've come to a point where people are often very, very engrossed in their devices, and it doesn't seem of concern. You can see someone, on the subway or at the dinner table, very, very engrossed in their phone or their tablet, and really not think much about it, assuming they're on social media or checking their email, and they could be gambling and you wouldn't necessarily know it. But as far as going to an actual gambling establishment, they might say that they're doing something else, or they might say that they won when they didn't win, or that they broke even when they actually lost. And so that would be what that looks like when you're hiding the extent of gambling from people who care about you. And then also jeopardizing your work, your relationships at home, your schooling, work opportunities. And so these are not small things. We're talking, let's say you have somebody who's gambling in a disordered way and they've been chasing those losses and they are getting in really deep financial difficulties and they're working multiple jobs. And so at their primary job, they're not doing so hot because they've got so many other jobs that they're not sleeping very much. Maybe they're very distressed and preoccupied with either gambling or with the financial worries that can often come with a gambling disorder. So they're not very productive, are doing very well at work. Sometimes they're going to have problems with their work relationships because maybe they borrowed a bunch of money from coworkers, or they're skipping out of work to go gamble, those sorts of things. And then we can have people becoming estranged from siblings, from parents, from their children due to their gambling, or divorces, those sorts of things happening as a result of the relationship strain that can come with any kind of addictive behavior, because you've got the sometimes dishonest behavior, you've got financial strains. These are all things that can lead to to relationship problems in and of themselves without the addictive disorder happening too. And then how could that affect school? Well, if we're talking about teens who are gambling, we can have teens staying up way late or even early into the morning, not sleeping at all, engaging in gambling behavior that really impacts their ability to even be awake, go to school, do their homework, perform well, maybe having difficulties with their peers because they've been borrowing money from their peers, or not paying them back when they borrowed money, or they're taking things because they're trying to pay back debts to somebody else. So it can become very destructive to lots of different life areas. And then also needing help to pay bills due to gambling. And so this is a big indicator. Gambling can be something that's really hard to recognize, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But one thing that could clue somebody in that somebody they care about might be struggling is, are they asking to borrow money from you? And if you asked yourself, should they be able to make ends meet? Why do they need help paying the rent, or why do they need help with a car payment? They otherwise should be doing okay. That could be one good reason to ask yourself, could it be gambling? And to explore that a little bit before necessarily just writing a check. And so I will be playing a brief video clip here that hopefully will help everyone to see that this can happen to anyone. Gambling becoming disordered is something that there's lots of reasons for that we're gonna get to, but it can happen to literally anyone. It's not about being smarter than or being stronger than. It's just something that can catch a lot of people unaware. So I will play this for you and then do a quick debrief afterwards.
So this morning we are kicking off a series, Addicted To, with a woman who is opening up about her problems with gambling and more. Sandra Udall became a mother as a teenager, later working her way off of welfare to become a prominent professor at the University of Wisconsin. But in 2005, she almost lost it all when one fateful trip to a Wisconsin casino nearly derailed her life. Watch. Sandra's first taste of gambling came in 2005 when her friend invited her to a casino.
It was disturbing. The moment I walked in to the casino, I was immediately bothered by the environment. First of all, it stank. When I was walking around in this place and looking and thinking, how can this be fun?
A few spins of the slot machine and she won an $1,100 jackpot.
It out, crisp $100 bills into my hand. I wanted to go back. So now I have to have a reason to go back. So I decided, well, I'm going to pretend to be, I'm going to do some investigative journalism and seeing what's inside, what can I write about?
But Sandra's so-called research visits were just an excuse to keep gambling. More and more and more.
I would often leave and I'd feel sick. Now I'm starting to drink more. So I'm getting a double dose of all of this, overstimulation and getting drunker and drunker because I hate myself for being there. I hated myself for being in these casinos. And in my journal, so many of the entries say, this is unhealthy, this is dangerous, why are you doing this? And I started taking out advances on my credit card. Then I started going into my salary, using my earnings to gamble. This is it was very rapid. This was a very rapid decline. And it's all, along the way, I'm telling myself, I need to stop because I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to destroy my life.
Her first major scare came when leaving a casino after a night of heavy gambling and drinking.
And I went outside to go to my car. And just as I got to the car, I saw something glittering on the floor, on the ground, right by my car. And I bent down to pick it up. It was a woman's watch. And the next thing I know, I was being lifted off the ground. And they said, well, give us your car keys. You're too drunk to drive. And so I did.
After that, Sandra says, she stopped gambling for over a year, but the drinking continued. And one night while drunk, she had the urge for those slot machines again and got behind the wheel.
I got stopped because I was apparently wavering like this. And the next thing I know, there's some lights behind me. It's the police. And it's like, they can't be pulling me over. And the next thing I know, this guy screamed at me and said, you're drunk. Turn around. And I was handcuffed and put in the back of the car.
Joining me now, Sandra Adele, who details her addiction in a memoir called Confessions of a Slot Machine Queen. Sandra, good morning.
Thank you.
It's a great book title. I know it was less than great to live it. So
right.
Before we get to that moment in the back of the police car, let's go back to the first time you went into the casino. So you weren't like a gambler, you weren't some sort of gambling lover.
No, not at all. In fact, nobody in my family gambles.
And so, but your friend sort of hooked you into it.
Well, she just took me to the casino, and I won. But I was also very, very nervous about the space itself because it wasn't healthy. It didn't feel good.
You knew that?
I knew that from the beginning, yes.
Do you think if you hadn't won that first time, this would have happened?
It wouldn't have happened. That's the hook. And also the other part was that after I won the money, I put money back into the machine. And I think I lost about $180. And then I started worrying about that. I mean, why would I sit there and lose this money?
Yep.
$1,000 is a lot of money. So that's the beginning of it. I began to worry about it, but then I also wanted to go back because now I thought, oh, there's something interesting to write about here.
Mm-hmm. And you convinced yourself as an academic
yes, I did.
that this would be an academic project for you.
Right.
You could blow the lid off of casinos. Right? And so, what was the very first sign that this has spun out of control? Because it wasn't like bankruptcy.
No, it was the emotional, the internal struggle that I had going on, especially as I began to lose money and started, dipping into my my earnings. Money changes value. I like to tell people that in the casino. You have the casino's money that you won out of the machines, and then you have your own money. So my deal was like, okay, if I'm going to go and do this research, and I have to research this, and and play the slots and see what it feels like and write about it, I will only use the money that I got out of the machines.
Their money.
Their money, right? And not my money. Well, that changed after a while. Then I'm using my money. And then I was becoming increasingly sick. I mean, feeling physically sick. And inside of me, every time I went into the casino, I would say, you know, you work too hard. This is risky because you're going to lose. You know, it's the casino. The house always wins. You're going to lose in the long run.
Especially on the slots.
On the slots, you're going to lose, yeah.
Right.
And so it was an ongoing struggle there. And the more I continued to go, there was this pull. I mean, sometimes I would be doing just my normal things. I'm a very active woman. And I would stop and go to the casino. And it was like, this is not making sense. What's happening to me?
But the whole system, Sandra says, is designed to reel you in and keep you in and keep you coming back. The academic was doing some research and was taking notes for all of that.
Notes for everything.
And we're going to have more on that right after the break. Don't go away. So Sandra Adele is a university professor, a mother, and a grandmother, and she is also an addict. Today, she's sober and sharing her story as written in Confessions of a Slot Machine Queen with the hope of helping others. So let's go to that moment. You're going around to the casinos, you're spending more, you're telling yourself it's research, and then you find yourself in the back of a police car.
Yeah.
Was that the aha moment for you?
That was the second aha moment. The first one...
There were a couple.
Yeah, the first one was in May 2007 when I got drunk at a casino. I had gone in and I decided, it was late at night, and I decided, that was the night that I fell out, passed out.
Yeah.
I decided that I was going to find the jackpot. It had to be there, and I was going to find it, and I needed to get in and get out. And then when I went out, just really tired and frustrated and drunk, just as I got to my car, I saw the watch. I fell down, passed out. I didn't know I had passed out until the next morning. They told me I had. I put myself into Gateway recovery that time. And then I started also working with a personal counselor, a therapist. And for a couple of years then, things
Did okay.
did okay, yeah.
And you relapsed.
The relapse was in July 10th, 2009. Again, I think that I might have been going sporadically to the casinos, and I decided again that this time, all right, I'm just going to go finish myself off here, I think. But I was very drunk, and I got arrested, and then the whole experience of getting arrested, being handcuffed and taken to jail, was like, okay, this is it.
I need to do something about this.
I'm in so much trouble.
You know, there's a question about how this successful college professor could have no inkling to gamble, could go into a casino one night, win $1,100. I mean, $1,100 is good, but it's not like, you know,
Right.
11 million. And then have such a Jones that her entire life gets wrapped around gambling like that. So Nancy Irwin is here. She's a psychotherapist specializing in addiction at Seasons Recovery Centers in California. She's not your therapist, but how can that be? How can that be that it can go like that?
Absolutely, because addictions have nothing to do with level of intelligence. And the casinos don't care she's got a PhD.
But the need, the urge to kick in so strongly, she went from not wanting to do it all to thinking about nothing else.
Many people who suffer from gambling addictions are genetically predisposed, meaning there's an abnormality on the dopamine receptor in the brain, which sets them up to have an impulse control disorder. So even at a later age in life, she wasn't in her 20s when she started this, it can take on at any time. So the brain is actively looking for the next high. And casinos, of course, slot machines are absolutely master manipulators. You cannot beat the house. Of course, we've all heard about big wins, and they occur. Yeah. But the reason they're so successful in making so much money and tantalizing addicts is because they use a variable ratio of reward response. Meaning, you get enough small wins that you're baited in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't you know what she means?
Yes.
You're there, you've lost, and just as you say out loud, I'm done after this last one, it makes you win. It's like it's in your head that it knows you're about to walk away. So did you feel that you had an addictive personality? I mean, the alcoholism must have played a role.
It must have, but also keep in mind that many of the gamblers, most gamblers in the casinos are smokers. For me, was, I don't know, well, I'm sure the alcoholism certainly played a role in it, but it's the rapidity and the repetition of the machines that really get you, and they're very interactive now. And everything about the casino just, it appeals to your senses. I didn't realize that I was being overstimulated.
Right.
And because this happened very, very fast.
And your family didn't know.
No, no one knows.
It was a
No,
secret.
I was just walking around, you know, being me.
And you seem charming. They know now, though, right? I mean, part of
Yeah.
your recovery, you're sober now.
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're off of gambling.
Yes, yes.
And part of it is that people know, right? The accountability.
Yeah, I'm accountable, but also there's the concern that I have as a Black woman, because when I started really doing some serious research, you know, I could not find any.
The real kind, not the fake kind.
I couldn't find, I found very little written about women in gambling. Almost nothing about gambling in the African American community. And this is a big surprise to me because I'm from Detroit. Detroit has 3 enormous casinos. I know that people are suffering from addictions, but where are they? Where are the women? And it's not easy to stand up here, to sit here and tell you that I had this experience, because this, and I call it an experience with gambling, this gambling disorder behavior. I come up with all kinds of names now because addict is too heavy a burden for me to bear. It's too heavy a label. So I'm finding other ways to express it. And I'm wondering if we take the word addict out of this, would more women come forth and say, look, this is disordered behavior, and I need help with it, and I need to find a place to go. Where are they going?
I've heard a lot of people who struggle with alcohol say, I'm not an addict, but I'm an abuser.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel more comfortable saying that. And that could be a first step if you are somebody who's struggling with this issue right now and feel, as Sandra does, that you don't like that word. The point is to get well and to save yourself from an environment that can be overstimulating and titillating in a way that could, for some, be potentially dangerous. Sandra, thank you so much. Highly recommend the book. Thank you as well, Nancy. If you want more information and if you'd like help, if you are or fear that you're becoming addicted to gambling, you can get it. We've posted it all for you at today.com/MeganToday.
So I hope that you enjoyed that clip. I've watched it many, many times, and I always notice something new in it. So many important points, as I mentioned going in. Just a good reminder that we're all people and no one is immune from being caught off guard by problematic gambling behavior. Something else I really liked about this clip was stress on the terminology that we use and how it can be not very accurate for some people, and in some ways stigmatizing and instilling shame, which is not what we need to do when somebody can inadvertently get caught up in something that there are a lot of reasons that it can go awry. And so it is always a good practice to think about, how do we label things? What do we call them? How do we talk about it? And is there any language that we use that might not be helpful, like the word addict? And keeping in mind that this is something that can happen along a whole spectrum, and we don't need someone to get to the point of having this label to go, hey, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe I need to correct course here. So if you want to watch that again, you can just go on YouTube and search for it. It is available to watch anytime. So moving on, as I mentioned, there's a lot of risks that can put people at a greater risk than the general population. And so age is one of those factors. Adolescents and young adults actually have a rate of gambling disorder 2 to 3 times that of adults. And I know a lot of parents might be going, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? This is another thing I need to worry about, another thing I need to think about. Actually, yes, it is. However, there's a lot that we can do to try to recognize this early on and actually prevent. And I'll mention a little bit of that moving forward. But yes, it is something that we do need to be aware of as adults that care for young people, as well as senior citizens. So it's kind of on both ends of the age range there, seniors have a greater risk for developing disordered gambling. This is something that I say with a big asterisk because there is research that shows that seniors who gamble are healthier than seniors that don't. And it makes sense if you have something to look forward to regularly in your life that's social, that's stimulating, that you get up and you go and you're, enjoy maybe a good meal compared to somebody who maybe doesn't. And so with that being said, as I mentioned earlier, not saying gambling is bad or that nobody should do it, but people who have an increased risk, it would be even more important to be aware of those signs that I talked about a little bit ago and be willing to do something about it really quickly if any of those are noticed, because our seniors would be in a position of having a more difficulty recovering financially if a gambling disorder goes unchecked. And so that is another topic that we could do a whole workshop on, and I'm happy to do that. And we'll talk about how that can be arranged later on. So another group that's at increased risk are military and veterans. And so lots of reasons for that. Partially age. Many people who enlist in the military are already in that young adult at-risk age range when they enlist. We also have to look at some personality characteristics of very brave, adventurous, possibly thrill-seeking amongst people who enlist in the military, having characteristics of gambling in a way that isn't all that deliberate and cautious, which would be a more lower risk way of gambling. Athletes, believe it or not. Now, this is an area that I am particularly interested in. Athletes have a greater risk of gambling disorder than the general population. Again, personality characteristics can come into play there when we talk about the high degree of competitiveness amongst athletes. And there's a lot of other factors. If you are interested in that, I have a blog called fightproblemgambling.com. You can check that out, and there's a lot of information on there about what makes somebody a good athlete. Doesn't necessarily make them a good gambler. There are some racial and ethnic differences in risk for gambling disorder. And we know that people who have substance use and or mental health conditions are at a greater risk as well. So what are some statistics related to gambling disorder and other substance use disorders? About 75% of people with a gambling disorder also have an alcohol use disorder. So very close connection there. And then about 40% of people with gambling disorder also have another substance use disorder. So another substance besides alcohol. And then smokers, or I should say people who use tobacco, have been found to have stronger urges to gamble, a higher severity of gambling disorder, and whether or not you use tobacco is highly predictive of relapse if you are trying to quit gambling. So strong connection there, much of that having to do with just the way that our brains work. Gambling and mental health, lots of connections here too. You'll see about 49% of people with gambling disorder also having a mood disorder, about 41% with an anxiety disorder, about 93% having had any psychiatric disorder in their lifetime, and then up to 34% of people with gambling disorder also having PTSD. And if you recall earlier when I was talking about how some people will gamble in a disordered way in response to emotional pain or physical pain, that is partially what we're seeing here as far as that connection. And then we do know that people with psychiatric disorders are over 17% more likely to develop a gambling disorder. But interestingly, the psychiatric disorder tends to come first. And we always have that chicken and egg thing with many different conditions that can come along together. Some other correlations, we know that there can be a higher rate of gambling disorder as well as substance or serious mental illness amongst the people who are homeless. And there is a complex relationship between mental illness and poverty. And we know that there is a higher rate of gambling disorder in people in impoverished conditions. And so I mentioned earlier that there are so many reasons that gambling can become disordered, that somebody who intends to gamble in a recreational, responsible way can find themselves gambling in ways that they hadn't intended. One, we're going to talk about how our memories work. Another is looking at what brain imaging tells us. There's something called the near miss effect. This is just another thing about how we're wired that can have some of us predisposed to having a greater risk for gambling disorder. We're going to look at reinforcement, so different ways that people learn and make associations between things, something called loss aversion, and then that there are certain things about gambling that don't make sense. The thing that makes sense is actually not true, and we'll dispel a little bit of those myths today. And then just recognizing that there are predispositions and vulnerabilities that can come to play. So let's talk a little bit about memory and gambling. There's something that people have called gambler math, which is, if you'll recall that earlier discussion about people being dishonest with their loved ones about the extent of their gambling. So the example of that would be, hey, I heard you just got back from Vegas. How'd you do? Oh, I came out ahead. Meaning I went with $200, I came back with $300, so I'm ahead. Not recognizing that there were 7 trips to the ATM during that trip. And so that's when someone is being dishonest about how they did gambling. However, there's some really, really compelling research that shows that memories that are more salient are remembered more clearly and for longer than memories that are not. And it's been proven that gambling wins are more salient than gambling losses. So if you ask somebody who is a gambler, and I'm not even saying a disordered gambler, just a gambler, are you up, down, or even? They're very likely to say to you, I'm up or I'm even, and not be lying, because their brains, our brains, are designed to remember wins for longer and clearer than losses. And so it is one reason that when we get to our responsible gambling strategies, that we talk about don't leave it to your memory because it's faulty, and just go into it knowing that our memories are faulty and enlist some strategies to counteract that. Now, brain imaging tells us some pretty interesting things. It shows that there is activation of the reward center of the brain in people who have gambling disorder, very much like in the brains of people who have other addictive disorders like cocaine addiction. And there's a similar lowered functioning in the areas of judgment and motivation, just like we see with the brains of other people struggling with addictive disorders. There's something called the near miss effect. You might have experienced this yourself. So when you almost win, it is very, very reinforcing to our brains. And so if you think about it, let's say you're doing a scratch lottery ticket and you've seen where you scratch and maybe you get a lemon and then you get a lemon. And if you got another lemon, you would win, but you got an orange. It looked a lot like a lemon when you're first scratching. That's a near miss, like I almost won. Or on a slot machine, you pull that handle or you press the button and then the wheels turn and you got a cherry gold bar, but there's like a little cherry peeking out. That's a near miss. And it's more reinforcing, or almost as reinforcing than winning for many of us, for just the way that our brains work. So you think, oh, I almost won, like I'm just right around the corner from a jackpot. So I'm going to play more. I'm going to put more money in. I'm going to play longer than I thought that I was going to. And the way that some games are designed is in a way that facilitates near misses happening or happening more often. If you think about what slot machines look like right now, they don't always have just one window of play. They might have multiple windows of play. So on one pull, you could have 2 or 3 or 4 near misses versus just one. So there's also the role of reinforcement. A person makes an association between a particular behavior and a consequence. And so how, like in the example here, there's been studies where you'll have a lab animal in a little compartment, and if they press a lever, a piece of food comes out. And so that's very exciting and reinforcing. And initially they will just press that lever and say, this is great. But if every time they press that lever, a piece of food comes out, over time, it's kind of like, it's not all that reinforcing anymore. It's been found through experiments like this that a specific reinforcement schedule, that meaning where it doesn't come out every time and it doesn't come out a specific amount, like not every 5th time or every 10th time. It might be the 5th time here, the 18th time here, the 31st time here, the 2nd time, the next time. If it is variable and intermittent, that is a way that our brains just happen to get really reinforced. And whether it's us, pulling a lever, pressing a button, whatever, or the animal pressing the lever, that can get the behavior to be just ongoing. And so a lot of the games that we play have this intermittent variable ratio of reinforcement, which is really based on what we know from research. And then also the speed of reinforcement. So how quickly between, me buying a ticket or placing a bet and either winning or not, how quickly does that happen? And so there's a lot of games that reinforce very, very quickly compared to others. And that can affect how compelled someone feels to continue playing that game. Then there's something called learning through association, and you'll see a lot of lucky charm type things here. And this is where this idea of luck and magical thinking comes into play. And you might have heard about an experiment with Pavlov's dogs, and this is where they had rung a bell at dinner time, and then over time, just hearing a bell would cause the dogs to salivate. And so they didn't even need the food anymore to get the response. And so if I had this nice little horseshoe in my pocket and I won, I now pair that, I associate that little talisman with winning, and it just feels very compelling and lucky. And people can, wear their lucky socks or their lucky jersey, or they can have a ritual that they undertake. Like maybe if they're playing cards, they knock on the cards, and they might even knock on the cards a certain number of times, or rub the cards, or rub the felt of the table, or they maybe pat the machine that they're playing. And it may sound foolish, but it is something that just can happen without people even thinking about it. And it just becomes habitual, and it becomes something that feels very true. And it's not, because we know intellectually that having a lucky charm or wearing a necklace with a little slot machine on it and pulling the lever and it just happens to have the same colored stones across, we know that's not going to change the outcome of the game, but it feels like it could, and it feels very real. I'm going to play a quick little video here for you that talks about chasing losses, which is one of the symptoms that I mentioned earlier. And this just tells you why does that happen? Because it doesn't seem to make sense, but it's something that can happen to a lot of us.
Picture yourself in a casino. You put down a $100 bet. You lose. Do you keep playing, or do you walk away? In most people, the part of your brain that tells you to keep playing is stronger than the part of your brain that lets you walk away. Don't believe me? There's a city in the middle of the desert that was built because people have a hard time walking away after they lose. So why is there such a strong urge to keep throwing money on the table after a loss? It's because deep inside of our brains, there's something very powerful called loss aversion. Basically, our brains hate pain. It doesn't matter if it's physical pain, emotional pain, or the pain of losing something like money. Our brains will do whatever they can to not have us experience the feeling of pain. Many times, this is great. It protects us, it's helped our ancestors, it allows us to survive. But there are times in our modern life where our brain is trying to protect us, but it's really hurting us. Let me give you a silly example. Do you have a shirt or a sweater that you will never wear again, but every time you go to your closet to throw it away, you just can't do it? That's loss aversion. Believe it or not, getting rid of that shirt or sweater is going to cause you some sort of pain in your brain. And your brain decides instead to leave that shirt in your closet to save you from experiencing that pain. So something similar is happening when we're playing blackjack and we throw more money on the table after a loss. Our brain hates that feeling of pain associated with losing. And our brain wants us to win as soon as possible, so we minimize the time we're experiencing that painful loss. Loss aversion can get serious. People can stay in bad relationships because they're afraid of the pain of the breakup. Or people can hold on to losing stocks or bad investments for the fear of letting go. So the next time you find yourself at the blackjack table, clearing out your closet, or making some big life decision, ask yourself, am I making the best decision, or is my brain protecting me from pain, which could end up hurting me in the long run? Thanks for watching A Dose of Science, and I, for one, think I made at least one very bad decision today.
So I hope that little clip helped to give a little bit of understanding about how normal it is for us to not stop doing something or not set something down that we really need to set down, and ask ourselves, why do I keep doing this? There's certain things just about the way that we're wired that actually have some evolutionary advantages that are come into play here, that we can, if we can be aware of them, we can know this is going to feel weird. This is going to feel like I shouldn't stop, but I need to stop. It's going to feel painful, but I can get through it. Now there's, this goes into the item that I mentioned where certain things about gambling seem to make sense that aren't actually true. And I'll give you one example, and it's called the gambler's fallacy or the Monte Carlo fallacy. And this example comes out of 1913 Las Vegas Monte Carlo casino, and in a game of roulette the ball had landed on black several times in a row, and the people in the area and at the table realized, wow, this has landed on black several times in a row, it's probably going to be red next. And so the bettors just placed everything on red. Well, guess what happened? The ball landed on blacks 27 more times in that one casino, on that one night at that one table. And this is back in 1913, so this is significant. Millions of dollars were lost in those 27 turns. And so those players were going under the faulty assumption that because it landed on black here, it should be red next. And we'll talk in a minute about why that's not correct. How probability works. Each event has its own odds, and those odds remain no matter what happened before. Example being a coin flip. If I flip a coin, it's a 50-50 chance of being heads or tails. And the next time I flip it, it's a 50-50 chance of being heads or tails, regardless of what happened in that prior flip. And the odds don't change due to other unrelated factors. So they don't change by what happened before, and they don't change because I have a horseshoe talisman in my pocket or I'm wearing my lucky socks. And then there's something that we should all know about called the house advantage. Now this, I think, comes out of New Zealand. I just like his accent, and I like these cute little video clips that give us a nice example. We've all heard the house always wins, but just understanding how you know, the industry works, and it thrives by over time winning more than losing as the house versus the player. And so we'll watch this real quick and just get a better understanding of how the house advantage works.
Would you bet regularly if you knew you couldn't win? Because long term you can't win, just as the venue can't lose. It's called the house edge, and it's a part of commercial gambling. Take the pokies. On average, they keep 10% of every bet. Behind every button press is a win for the venue and a loss for you. That's time and money you could spend on a day out with family, relaxing on your new deck, or a luxury holiday. And guess what? You may get lucky in the short term, but over time, you will lose. The longer you play, the more you lose. Ask me about the house edge. I'm Jack. You can find me at knowyourodds.net.au.
Authorised by the Tasmanian.
Oh, Tasmania. Okay. So this is just a good example. Many people who gamble have the mistaken understanding that the longer I play, the more likely I am to win. And with many games, over time, the exact opposite is true. And so if we can come into the decision to gamble or not gamble, being informed, hopefully we can all make healthier decisions. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are some predispositions or vulnerabilities that some people can bring to the table, including early exposure. This is something that we do not, as a culture, really understand very well yet, and that's okay. There was a time that we didn't understand that early exposure to alcohol really predisposed youth to have alcohol problems. We get that now, and we have social hosting laws, and we have people really discouraging underage drinking as a result. We need to get there now with gambling, because we don't as a society understand that giving, for example, lottery tickets to kids for their birthday or during the holidays actually can be harmful. And so because we don't know, this is something where there should be no shame or, finger pointing or anything like that. Just let people know, like, oh my gosh, I just heard that we shouldn't be doing this. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it predisposes a young person to have a gambling problem. And so just making some changes, and next year during the holidays, skip the lottery tickets for kids. Don't place sports bets for kids when you're all sitting together watching a sporting event. I would even go so far as to say not highlighting and emphasizing sports betting that is happening in front of the kids, like, oh, I just made $300, just like you wouldn't necessarily really play up the euphoric effects of drinking alcohol in front of minors. Okay. Family history. So it's not just a family history of disordered gambling. It's interesting that there's a genetic predisposition for gambling disorder that really is related to any sort of addictive disorder. And the number one connection is actually a first order relative with alcoholism. So either a parent or a sibling or a child having alcoholism makes that individual more likely to have gambling disorder. So just keeping that in mind, if I have a family history of alcohol or drug problems, maybe I need to be, not maybe, I definitely need to be more cautious about the decision to bring gambling into my life. Other psychiatric or addictive disorders in the individual themselves. So if I'm struggling with PTSD, with depression, with anxiety, again, being very cautious about bringing gambling into your life. If you're recovering from another substance use disorder, being very, very careful of something we call cross addiction, which is just, being caught off guard and moving into another addictive disorder. So there is something that we should be aware of among disordered gamblers. There are two different types, and they're called action and escape, and it tends to be divided somewhat between genders. But as I mentioned earlier, people do not fit neatly into boxes, and I've known many people who don't, fit into these categories. But our action gamblers tend to like games like the casino games, poker, roulette, blackjack, sports betting, the horse track, and they tend to be males. And what happens is they have an adrenaline response to gambling. So they can feel very elevated, excited, energized, powerful, important. And then on the flip side, you can have someone who's what we call an escape gambler. And this is someone who can become very peaceful, calmed, maybe even somewhat zoned out by gambling, maybe even having kind of a numbing effect. These tend to be females, but as I've said, I've known many males that have fallen into this category, and they often are escaping some sort of emotional or physical pain. They are often playing games like slot machines, video slots, video poker, and either one of these, the action or the escape, either one of these responses can serve for that individual a temporary distraction from something in their life. And so whether action or escape, please don't take that to mean that an action gambler might not be escaping something, because they might be, and they need that feeling of adrenaline and excitement, importance, power, possibly feeling very unsafe or disempowered in another part of their life. So I would like everyone, as they're watching this, to think, how could problem gambling hurt people, families, and communities? And I'll give you some examples. One, debt and bankruptcy. Because you need money in order to gamble, when you gamble in a disordered way, the financial repercussions can be great. You can have a great deal of debt, a number of people claiming bankruptcy as a result of gambling. People can, as I mentioned earlier, have job problems, even job loss, getting fired, sometimes even in some cases where they are borrowing money from coworkers or actually engaging in theft from the place of employment in order to continue gambling. Relationship problems, divorce, as I mentioned earlier, even homelessness, where you have people who over time are not able to remain housed due to their ongoing gambling. And health problems. This may seem really odd. We all know that with alcohol and drugs, of course, they can have physical repercussions because it's a physical thing coming into your body. But you would possibly be surprised to find out that there can be health problems from gambling, including a higher rate of hypertension and even cardiac arrest amongst problem gamblers. It's a very stressful condition. All the financial worries, all the relationship worries, the job worries. It can often be a very sedentary behavior, long periods of time on end spent gambling, often just sitting down, often neglecting hydrating or eating properly, or even taking medications that you need for other conditions. And then legal involvement. So it has been found that about half or even more of people with gambling disorder have engaged in some sort of illegal activity in response to their gambling. And these are usually low-level, white-collar, non-violent offenses, like writing bad checks, using someone else's credit card, retail theft, those sorts of things. They can be more significant. And if you've ever seen it in the news, so-and-so embezzled millions of dollars from this fund or from their company or from this town. I will always say this, it is very, very hard to discreetly spend millions of dollars, but it is not hard to discreetly gamble millions of dollars. And so when you see those kinds of things in the news, you might ask yourself, I wonder if gambling was involved. And then this is the one that I close on when we talk about how problem gambling can hurt individuals, because it can be fatal. And I've even known counselors, alcohol drug counselors, who will say about gambling disorder, well, it's not like it's as bad as this. And I don't like to play that game, like what's worse than this, but it can kill. And so we have to be aware that some people, out of hopelessness and helplessness related to what's been happening with their gambling, decide or feel that they have no other action that they can take, and attempt suicide. And there is a very high suicide attempt rate amongst problem gamblers. There's a very high serious suicidal ideation rate amongst problem gamblers. And so we need to instill hope. We need to make sure that people know that there is help available, because there's always an opportunity for things to get better. It's just a matter of halting that gambling and reaching out for help, because there's lots of help available, and we will talk about that. So what makes gambling so different? There's a lot of similarities that you might have noticed in what we talked about so far from other addictive disorders, whether it be alcohol use disorder, cocaine, opioid use disorder. But there are some unique differences that are important to realize. One, there's no threshold for use. So if I'm drinking alcohol and I drink and I drink and I drink, at a certain point, my brain's going to be like, you're done, and I am going to pass out. I can't drink anymore. The drinking stops. Same thing with drugs. However, with gambling, there's no physical threshold. There's no physiological threshold for use. I can keep going as long as I can keep accessing funds. And unfortunately, that could mean I plow through my checking account, my savings account, my spouse's accounts, my work accounts, maxing out credit cards, taking out loans, sometimes taking out high interest loans, pawning anything that I have of value. And so it can spiral out of control really quickly. There's nothing necessarily that's going to halt it as far as just a physical threshold. And so when we talk about things that can help, we'll talk about some other barriers that can be put in place to try to minimize that episode. And there's very low public understanding. If you asked a 10-year-old about alcohol or drug abuse, they've heard of it. They know it exists. I don't think there's many people that don't know, yeah, addiction exists. But if you ask the general public about gambling disorder, gambling addiction, problem gambling, you're going to get a much different response. And very often it's going to be, well, that's not not like alcohol or drug addiction, or people don't have to gamble. So it's, they just are being really irresponsible and not very smart. And so not good understanding, very high stigma. You have people who would consider somebody who gambles in a disordered way as being foolish, as being selfish. And you can't test for it. The physical signs are confusing. With alcohol, you can smell it on somebody. With certain drugs, you can see just by the size of the pupils or the condition of the skin and teeth. And gambling is very, very different. If you see any physical changes in the person, it's often due to that stress that I told you about earlier, or maybe they're more disheveled because they're not sleeping well. They're not taking care of hygiene because they're just so overwhelmed and anxious and depressed. And so it can be very, very confusing. And then unfortunately, the problem can seem like the solution to somebody who is struggling. So what do I mean by that? If I've gotten really deep into gambling, I have a ton of debt, I've been hiding it from my spouse, what would solve that? For some gamblers, it's the big win. I just have to keep gambling in order to hit that jackpot so I can put all the money back where it belongs and everything's going to be wonderful again. And unfortunately, the jackpots are very, very few and far between, so they're not likely. And a very insightful, knowledgeable, recovering gambler is going to know that there's no win that's enough. It's the gambling behavior itself. There's nothing that's going to be enough to satiate. It's kind of something that you just keep doing. And so it's very unfortunate, because if I have an alcohol problem, if I have a drug problem, I don't actually believe that drinking more or using more is going to make things better. I might know that I won't think about my problems for a while, but I'm not going to think that they're going to be solved by drinking or using. But a gambler might actually believe that. So I want to go back to the beginning where I said people are people and they're not boxes. So if you heard something today that just doesn't fit with what you've seen or you've experienced or what people you care about have seen or experienced, that's okay. We're all different. At the same time, knowing all those risks, knowing all those categories could help us to make better decisions moving forward. So anyone who's thinking about gambling should consider, examine your own unique risk. Do I have a family history of alcohol or drug use? Am I an athlete? Am I in the military? Am I a veteran? What about my age? Do I fall into one of these high-risk categories? And if I do choose to gamble, to follow responsible gambling strategies, to revisit periodically, take a break from time to time. I say with anything, whether you're drinking, you're using something, you're gambling, always a good idea to take a break to see, can I step away from this? And if I have a hard time stepping away from it, what do I want to do about that? And then don't do it in secret, because anything that happens in secret can tend to get bigger and go unchecked for longer. So what is what we would call responsible gambling or lower risk gambling is probably the best way to phrase it. It is gambling in a way that you see the cost of gambling as the price for that recreation. So if I go to the movies, I don't expect to come out with more than I went in with. So I factor in the cost of the tickets and the dinner that we're probably going to eat right before and all the snacks. And then I just say, yes, I'm willing to lose this tonight. And that's how much it costs. Likewise, for any form of gambling, recognize that you're likely to lose it, factor it in, be okay with it in advance, or don't do it. Playing with your own money. So this means don't borrow money, don't use money you need for bills, don't use your future money that you haven't earned yet, meaning don't use credit. And then set limits and stick to them. So this would be, for example, a dollar limit. I might say, I'm going out gambling tonight and I'm taking $150. And if that is gone in 20 minutes, or if it's gone in 2 hours, I leave. But also setting a time limit, because gambling is one of these things that you can get caught up in and lose a whole lot of time. And so knowing ahead of time, I'm playing for 2 hours tonight. When that 2 hours hits, if I'm up, down, or even, it's time for me to leave. And so that can be difficult, but that is the lower risk way to gamble. Quitting when you lose. So if you lose, don't chase those losses. Again, earlier, if you're following this, that loss would have been something that you would made peace with in advance, that you had already budgeted for and said you were okay with. But also, if you win, because it happens sometimes, be grateful, go out to dinner, put some more money on into the savings account or something like that, and know that you're one of the outliers, because that's what happens. Some people win sometimes. So we're one of those people, great. Run with it. Don't give it all back. Okay, because that can be the opposite of chasing losses, is basically playing back your winnings. And then not gambling to cope, just like we wouldn't recommend chugging a bunch of alcohol or using drugs when you're distressed. Gambling is not something to do when you're distressed either. Don't mix gambling with alcohol, which may seem ironic, because many, if not most places that you can gamble, you can also drink alcohol. However, alcohol can affect your judgment. It can affect your memory. And these are things that we really need to be really in good shape if we're making important decisions, like how to spend our money and our time. And then log your activity. So remember how I said that our memories are faulty and we're going to remember our wins more than we remember our losses? So don't leave it to your memory. Write it down. Consider having a log book. And when we do in-person workshops, if there are people in the audience who choose to gamble, we'll provide that. Have a logbook where you mark it down. On this date, I played this much and this is what I lost, or this is what I won, so that you can, at the bottom of each page, tally it and go, oof, I'm not doing as well as I thought I was. Maybe I want to adjust my budget. And so again, not leaving it to our faulty memories. And then knowing the sign of a problem, which we talked about before, and getting help if they occur. So please keep in mind, even if you don't gamble, you can be affected by someone else's gambling. So you might care about someone who does gamble. So knowing these strategies, knowing the signs and symptoms can help you to help them. You could be affected by someone else's gambling if they're borrowing money from you, if they're stealing money, if they're not able to function at work, if they're not taking care of their home, they're going to lose their home. Your neighbor, you have two people in your neighborhood where their homes are getting foreclosed on. This affects you. And so it's important for all of us to be aware of how problem gambling can affect individuals around us. There's a ratio that's been found, which is for every person with gambling disorder, about 8 people are significantly affected by that. That could be their children, their siblings, their parents, their spouse, their best friends, their coworkers, their boss, people who trust them and care about them. And then I really hope that everybody, as you encounter people and you run into somebody who seems to be struggling with something, to ask and add, could they be gambling to the list of things that you ask when you encounter someone who might be struggling with something. So what can you do? Talk about this. Say, hey, I saw this thing that the library posted on their Facebook or YouTube. I didn't know that. Did you know that? Because you never know who's going to be listening, and you never know if there's not a person who was struggling in silence and possibly considering suicide, as I mentioned earlier, and now you just threw them a life vest. Learn more if you're interested. Schedule a workshop for your group. There's no aspect of the community that can't be affected by problem gambling. So there's no aspect of the community that couldn't benefit from a workshop like this tailored to their specific circumstances. Discourage underage play. As I said, don't do it in a mean, like you're hurting children way, because we don't know better. And until we know better, cut people some slack, drop some knowledge on them in a nice, gentle way. Like, I just heard this. I had no idea. I'm going to stop giving lottery tickets to my grandkids. Do you think maybe you want to as well? And then know the resources, because there are a ton of resources and they don't help if people don't know about them. And then get involved if you're so inclined. So how would you get involved? Well, there are advocacy groups, including, and this is just a couple, the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling. This is a nonprofit. You could go to icpg.info if you want to learn more about that. It's a statewide organization committed to raising awareness and advocating for those affected by problem gambling. And then the National Council on Problem Gambling, their website is ncpgambling.org. And then there could be volunteer opportunities. We can't do what we do here without an amazing volunteer, as well as a group of youth volunteers who are putting together some really great educational videos for the community. So if that's something you're interested in, you might look into what's around you and are there volunteer opportunities to help. So there is a statewide helpline that we should all know, because it's really easy to remember. It's 1-800-GAMBLER. This will get people to counseling, to support that's available, and other resources that can help those who are affected by problem gambling. Their website is weknowthefeeling.org, and at that website, the helpline staff are also available 24/7 by live chat. In Lake County, we have 211. There in Kane County, in West Dundee, there is also 211. I saw it on the library website, so you might want to check that out. Not this website, because that's specific to Lake where I work. But there's also a group called Gamblers Anonymous, and they can be reached at gachicago.org. That's their website, and there's a phone number for them. Very much like Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous. It's a 12-step support group for people struggling with problem gambling by people who are choosing to quit gambling as well. And then a group called Gam-Anon, which is a lot like Al-Anon or Alateen, which is for the loved ones of people struggling with gambling problems. And gamblingchicago.org is their website, and they also have a number here listed. So there's lots of pathways to recovery, including the 12-step programs I just mentioned, but Smart Recovery, you can go to smartrecovery.org and find lots of online resources. There's an excellent site called Gamblers in Recovery that has hundreds of web-based support meetings that can really be tailored to your particular interests or group. And then there's lots of others. So if anybody wants to learn about what's available in their area, again, 1-800-GAMBLER or WeKnowTheFeeling.org, it's just a great place to start. There is also something called the Illinois Problem Gambling Registry. It might sound like you are registering to be a problem gambler, and that's not what it is. It's actually a site where you could register your email address and get a monthly email that summarizes the help that's available. This is really important. I am on this list. I get this email every month because there are changes that come. And if there's a new resource that could help that wasn't available before, I sure want to know about it. One example I'll tell you is there is a self-exclusion program for people who are casino gamblers or sports bettors, where they can basically self-ban and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this responsibly. I want to enter into an agreement with the Illinois Gaming Board to not do this anymore. And so right now that's available for, as I said, casino gamblers and sports bettors. At some point it might be available for other forms of gambling. And this could be a place where you could learn about that quickly. Locally, right there in West Dundee, there is a provider of gambling counseling. They're called Associates in Behavioral Health Care. You've got Mary Crick there, you've got Danielle, really wonderful staff. They can be reached at their website, abc-duy.com. And they do have a number both in English and Spanish that you can reach them. So don't hesitate to reach out to them. And just know that it's not just counseling. There's a lot of resources available for people who want to make changes around their gambling, including that self-exclusion program, the voluntary self-exclusion program, as I mentioned. But there are workbooks that people can do on their own that could be emailed to them, and they can print them out or not, just look at them on their screens. There's even a program that you can install on multiple devices that will block gambling on across all your devices for a whole year for a 1-year subscription. And then guess what? Your local library is an excellent resource because there's just so much. Libraries are more than they used to be. And I don't even want to say just books, because books are awesome, but it's much more than just books anymore. There's books and movies and a digital library that can be accessed without even stepping foot into the facility, but there's meeting rooms that can be registered for and set up for your own meetings that you have. There's notary, there's homebound services, computers, and believe it or not, 3D printing. How cool is that? And lots of programs like this. And then hopefully soon in-person programs and a real hub for resources in the community. So please do visit the Fox River Valley Library, two great locations. And the website has tons of really good resources. So please check it out. Get your card if you don't have one. And then us at NICASA, we can be a resource for you if you are interested in doing free workshops that are tailored to your group or based on your interests, like teens or seniors or athletes, that sort of thing. And then we do have free counseling for gambling, both for the gambler or the loved one. And we can be reached at info@nicasa.org. And our main number is 847-546-6450. So that was a ton of information. I hope that some of that was helpful for you. But again, reach out to 1-800-GAMBLER if you need to know more about what's available in your area. If you are checking this out from West Dundee, you've got a great provider right there in the area. If you're looking for a free workshop for your group, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I thank you for your attention, and thank you for the real hope that you can instill just by talking about this to other people. I hope you have a wonderful summer, and maybe I'll see you in person.